of ECOG 0, no pallor or ictus, no generalized lymphadenopathy, vitals were normal. On local examination, on inspection, there was a visible fullness noted occupying the right retromandibular groove. Overlying skin was normal. Patient did not have any facial asymmetry. On palpation, a 4 into 3 centimeter swelling was palpable in the parotid region, which was occupying the right retromandibular groove, obliterating it. The surface was irregular, margins were well defined. The consistency was hard and non-tender. The mobility was restricted. The plane of the swelling was deep to parotid fascia, and the swelling was not fixed to skin or sternomastoid. Facial nerve examination was normal, and lower cranial nerves examination normal. Temporomandibular joint movements normal. Mandible, there was no tenderness or deformity appreciable. On oral cavity and oropharynx examination, patient did not have any trismus or ankyloglossia. Parotid duct opening was visualized and found to be normal. There is no visible bulge in the oropharynx. Neck examination revealed no nodes.
Anything else? Local examination? So what all things you examined locally?
I've examined the swelling per se, the facial nerve function, temporal.
Yeah. So when you're examining the swelling, what all areas are you looking for? You mentioned the TM joint. You mentioned the mandible. What else you should be mentioning or examining?
Mandible, TM joint, masseter, sternomastoid, the surrounding structures basically. And when I'm examining the oral cavity, I'm looking for any deep lobe involvement if it is a parotid swelling.
What about the external canal?
Yes, sir. Overlying skin normal, EAC is also normal.
Right. So why is that important?
Because it has a tendency to spread to the ear canal also, the parotid tumor, because there's a thin fascia between the tragus and the parotid gland. So the propensity of spread to EAC is high.
Right. So you want to know clinically whether the temporal bone and the external canal are involved?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, go on.
Contralateral parotid region normal. Scalp and skin of the face normal. Systemic examination normal. That finishes my examination, sir.
Okay.
To summarize, this is a 26 years young male software engineer with no adverse habits. He presented with a pain swelling in the parotid region, right side, of 8 months duration, progressive in size. On examination, 4 into 3 centimeters hard, well-defined, non-tender swelling noted, which was obliterating the right retromandibular groove with restricted mobility. And there was no associated facial palsy or neck node.
What's your diagnosis?
My diagnosis is a right parotid tumor, probably malignant.
Okay. Why are you considering it as a malignant tumor?
So, male patient, he presented with a short duration swelling anatomically in the region of parotid. And on examination, the lesion is hard and it has restricted mobility.
So what is the probable diagnosis? What kind of histology would you be looking at?
Mucoepidermoid carcinoma would be my first. That would come to my mind first.
Okay.
Diagnosis. Because that can happen in, usually the age group fits into that, 20 years to start with. Mean age is 40 years for mucoepidermoid CA, males, male gender. And examination findings also fit in for a mucoepidermoid CA.
Okay. You can also mention that that's the most common tumor.
Yes, sir. Statistically also that is the most common tumor.
It's more likely to be malignant tumor, and in this case, it could be mucoepidermoid carcinoma. So how will you proceed?
Sir, I would like to confirm my diagnosis. Also, I would like to do some investigations to stage my disease. So I have an MRI with me, and I have ultrasound guided FNA, two modalities. I would like.
So what would you have done first?
I would do a MRI of parotid, followed by an ultrasound guided FNA.
So what is the indication for doing an MRI and not a CT scan?
Yes, sir. Usually CT and MRI preferred when the tumor is a bit large and there is some, and if it's present with a little bit advanced stage. And MRI specifically is indicated when we suspect, when the tumor is large, we suspect some deep lobe involvement, we suspect perineural invasion, we suspect parapharyngeal space involvement, and if you want to look for intraparotid nodes. And compared to CT, it gives a better delineation of soft tissue structures and neural structures. So for these reasons, I would prefer MRI. Also nodes. For nodes, it's more sensitive than CT.
And what about the carotid artery?
Vessels, it's vessels is equally sensitive, sir.
So MRI is also a better modality as compared to CT. And that is important, especially in deep lobe tumors, because they come in close proximity to the styloid and the internal carotid artery.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what did your FNAC show?
Actually, this patient was evaluated with an FNA outside.
Okay.
The FNA, I think ma'am can show the investigations.
The FNAC was a pleomorphic adenoma.
Okay. Can we show the MRI, please?
Yes, sir. So this is a MRI showing T1 section and on the right showing a T2 axial image. So here we can see the whole of the parotid gland, and there is a homogeneous hypointense lesion in T1, which is with well-defined borders occupying the superficial lobe of the parotid, and it is hyperintense in T2.
Why you're saying it's a superficial lobe of the parotid?
Because here we can see that it is superficial to the retromandibular vein, sir.
Okay.
And this is the deep lobe of the parotid gland, which is free.
Right.
And so the margins are well defined. There is no, it is well defined. It is homogeneous, and it is a focal growth. When we look at the whole cross section, it is a focal growth in the parotid gland, and there is no heterogeneity in the signal intensity, and it is occupying the superficial lobe. And I would scroll further.
Does it correlate with your clinical findings?
Actually, it does not, sir.
So in what way is it different from your clinical findings?
It suggests more of a benign parotid tumor.
So why do you think that you have a restricted mobility and here it is FNAC's pleomorphic adenoma?
So clinically, when I, with the clinical examination without looking at the MRI, I had a diagnosis of even benign mixed parotid tumor in my mind with a deep lobe involvement. If the benign tumor is having a deep lobe involvement, it would have a restricted mobility.
So why are you thinking it's a deep lobe and not a superficial lobe on clinical examination? What clinches the diagnosis of a deep lobe tumor?
Once there will be a visible bulge in the oropharynx, but always the case. The parapharyngeal space involvement may not cause a bulge always. And actually, a tumor was having some mobility, so that would mean that.
Location of the lesion, does it give you a clue?
Yes, sir. It is in the more posterior near the tail of the parotid.
It's not in the preauricular region.
Okay.
It's in the retromandibular region. That's what you specified, that it's in the retromandibular region. There's an oblication of the groove as well as there's an elevation of the lobule.
Yes.
So all these point towards a deep lobe lesion. And does the retromandibular vein be a sufficient landmark to qualify as a deep lobe or a superficial lobe?
Actually, radiologically, that is what is the indication for commenting on the deep lobe.
Right. So those are when there is a normal anatomy. So this is a distorted anatomy, and now you are finding that the lesion technically appears to be deep lobe, retromandibular, but on radiology appears to have pushed the retromandibular vein inferiorly and posteriorly.
Yes, sir.
So clinically, you should still maintain that this could be a deep lobe tumor.
Yes.
Radiologically, do you think this is a malignant tumor?
No, sir. But
Right.
we cannot say that 100% because MRI cannot differentiate that well between a benign and a low grade CA. So I would, as a radiologist, I would also give two possibilities. But this well-defined homogeneous, well-defined borders, homogeneous intensity, and no infiltration to surrounding structures, most likely benign.
So what do you normally see in a mucoepidermoid carcinoma on radiology?
It may not be homogeneous, and it is less hyper intense compared to what is seen here in a T2 image. And the borders are usually not this well defined. The borders are usually.
So what is characteristic of a mucoepidermoid on imaging on a MRI?
It is the margins are.
Mucoepidermoid. It's mucin filled tissue. So you would see some mucin filled tissue and you'll have variegated appearance.
Heterogeneous
Well differentiated, you'll have more mucin filled tissues which will appear cystic, and you would have solid components. You'll have a mixed appearance. This is a homogeneous appearance.
Yes.
All through, and you can see that there are very well defined margins. You can see a plane around the tumor separating the parotid from the lesion.
Yes, sir.
So this appears to be more of a benign lesion as compared to a malignant. On FNAC, how are we so sure that this is a pleomorphic adenoma? Can you go by that FNAC report, or would you?
No, sir. FNAC is not 100%. FNAC is not 100% sensitive.
So
there is.
What is the evidence of the FNAC giving you a clue towards a lesion?
So
FNAC, with certainty, the histology.
The sensitivity is reported to be 65 to 90%, sir. And some studies even quote as 99% sensitivity. And there is a discordance between FNA and final HPR in 20% of cases, according to some studies. And
so what would be a differential diagnosis in a pleomorphic adenoma?
Clinically, sir?
Yeah. No, on FNA.
Pleomorphic adenoma, it could be with FNA, it could be confused with a Warthin's lymphoma also.
Are you sure?
Because FNA usually has less sensitivity in pleomorphic adenoma and low-grade mucoepidermoid CA. That could be a confusion in that.
Actually, an acidic cell tumor.
Okay.
Or sometimes even an adenoid cystic tumor, but not lymphoma. Lymphoma is very specific, and they can use the immunohistochemistry to diagnose it. Okay. So now what would you do for this patient?
So my MRI says it's a benign lesion confined to superficial lobe, and there is.
Can you see that image again?
Yes, sir. There are some intraparotid nodes seen.
Right. So now, having done the MRI, how would you go about planning the surgical resection? Does it change? Does it help you in?
Yes, sir. If it's pointing towards a benign tumor, it's well defined and it's confined. It's a focal lesion. I would be planning for a superficial parotidectomy in this case.
Though it is a deep lobe tumor, clinically?
I would keep my options open and even counsel the patient regarding the same. With superficial bar total conservative parotidectomy. So
why are you worried about saying a total parotidectomy, total conservative parotidectomy in this patient? Because your counseling is very important.
Yes, sir. If I commit to that, then I should be counseling the patient about the postoperative facial nerve palsy.
So you will not in this patient?
Sorry, sir?
Are you concerned about the facial nerve palsy in this patient, going by the location of the lesion?
Not by the yes, sir. By radiologically, it is just pushing the retromandibular vein. So and there's no infiltrating margins, so I'm not worried radiologically. But as the size of the excision increases, the rate of complications increase.
Can you show the image again?
The contrast image.
Yeah, we are not seeing it. You need to share your screen.
I just screen share again, no, Vijay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you can go ahead and pause it at the same place that you had shown previously. Right, just pause it here. So you can see this is the location of the retromandibular vein, and the tumor right above.
Yes, sir.
So would this location of the lesion over the retromandibular vein put the facial nerve at risk?
Yes, sir.
So we know that this is a lesion that has pushed the nerve inferiorly and posteriorly to the mandible. So you might encounter a difficult time dissecting it, and you might have the nerve at risk. So yes, you will want to use this information on imaging to counsel your patient for the possibility of facial nerve palsy.
Yes, sir.
So you would want to use this imaging for the benefit of your counseling and also
Yes.
for dissection purposes. Would you do a deep lobe resection only in this patient?
Deep lobe resection only, sir.
Yes, because I can see that the entire parenchyma of the superficial lobe seems normal to me.
No, sir, I would not do that.
Would you consider? You have a FNAC which is benign, and you told me yourself that the sensitivity is upwards of 61%. The patient is young, 26-year-old, 8 months history, which is insidious. Would you want to do a deep lobe parotid alone? And if so, what is the literature for evidence for it?
Deep lobe resections usually done for benign tumors only.
So this is benign.
But I cannot rely 100% on the FNA. And also, FNA is not 100% foolproof, so I cannot go by the FNA and plan preoperatively about the isolated deep lobe resection.
Can I?
Yeah, go on, Bipin.
Vijay, on what basis have you categorized this as a deep lobe tumor? Can you just point out the feature?
No, sir, it is not being characterized as a deep lobe tumor. It is in the superficial lobe, but it is pushing the retromandibular vein posteriorly.
No, you said it's a. You started off saying that it's a your clinical diagnosis is malignancy based on the fixity of the swelling. So for a benign tumor to apparently simulate a malignancy, what should be the reason for it? You said it is going to the deep lobe.
Yes, sir. It is clinically, I had a differential diagnosis of a restricted mobility tumor, which could be benign because of deep lobe involvement. That was my argument, sir.
So if that is the case, what is the reason for the fixity? Is it a dumbbell tumor? What is a dumbbell tumor?
Actually, it is not fixed, sir. It has only restricted mobility. And dumbbell-shaped tumors are when you see a bulge in the oral cavity, and also you see a superficial component.
Okay, so for that, what kind of clinical test do you do?
Actually, yeah, we can do intraorally. There will be a bulge, and also it can be confirmed by a bimanual palpation, but it is not recommended.
Why?
Bimanual palpation is usually uncomfortable for the patient because it's mentioned in the textbooks, but we don't do it.
And how do in this particular imaging, how do you say it's malignancy? What are the typical identifying feature? What is the distinguishing feature which says that it's a malignant? Sorry, it's a benign lesion.
It's a homogeneous signal intensity, well-defined borders, and there is no involvement of surrounding structures.
Yeah, you can see a definite loosened line around the tumor, no, which is
Yes,
very
sir.
typical of a malignant lesion. Okay, Pratmesh, go ahead.
So after having done the surgery, what are the complications you expect in this patient?
Intraoperatively, sir.
Intraop and post-op.
Intraoperatively, first of all, there can be bleeding during the dissection. There can be facial nerve injury, either due to traction or due to cautery, or it could be due to ischemia of the vasa nerve also. Also, sometimes there may be inability to identify the nerve. That could be also a complication.
Okay.
And
So what are your landmarks for identifying the nerve?
so my landmarks would be first tracing of the posterior digastric up to the junction with the sternomastoid and identifying the mastoid process. Landmark number 1. Number 2, dissecting deeper near the tragus and finding the anterior inferior part of the cartilaginous EAC. Second landmark. So I would there's a fibrofatty layer covering this groove, the tympanomastoid groove, and I would dissect deeper layer by layer to identify this fascial nerve. So tragal pointer, posterior belly of digastric and mastoid would be my landmarks.
Right. So then post-op, what complications you expect?
Postoperatively, the most common complication is a facial nerve paralysis, reported about 30 to 50%. And apart from that, there could be wound complications, wound infections, seromas, fistulas, Fraze syndrome. Fraze syndrome is more of a sequelae than a complication because it's found in almost every person. And
so how would you now prevent these complications?
So intraoperatively, to number 1, bleeding, I can go with a hypotensive anesthesia, keep the systolic BP maintained at 100, and use bipolar cautery rather than using a unipolar, and go in the proper surgical planes. That would be one. Inability to identify facial nerve, I can always go for a retrograde dissection, trace from the peripheral branches and try to identify. And facial nerve injury, I will do a repair intraoperatively using various techniques from suturing to grafts and transfers. Postoperatively, to prevent a facial nerve paralysis, I would keep in mind 2 important points while doing a dissection: my anatomical landmarks and proper tissue handling. So this would prevent facial nerve paralysis in most of the cases. And since I'm a beginner and I would like to make use of intraoperative nerve monitoring, especially in cases of where large tumors and suspected deep lobe involvement, like in this case. And if I want to quote some other setting, it would be a post-RT field or a fibrosis field also where ION can use. For this case, I would like to use IONM. And
so what is the indication in this patient?
So it's a large tumor and it's closely abutting the, it's a very close relation with the retromandibular vein. And so sometimes I might have difficulty in separating it off the nerve, or I may not be able to find the nerve because of distorted anatomy.
So how will
the vein in this one? Just which one? The And when you do the surgery, where do you expect the facial nerve to be? The mass is going to be deeper or going to be coming above the trunk and the branches of the facial nerve?
Mass is going to be just above the trunk, sir. So in this case, sir, sorry, sir.
To the trunk. That's what you meant, is it?
Yes, sir, superficial to the trunk.
So I wanted to know about the facial nerve monitoring.
Yes,
How does the facial nerve monitoring help?
So one is it will give a good functional assessment of the nerve during the surgery, and at the end of the surgery, if it is positive, if the IONM is positive for the complete functional intactness, post-operatively I can be confident about my patient's paresis, which may recover completely. So at the end of the surgery, if IONM is showing intact facial nerve, I can be pretty confident in the post-operative period about my surgery. So that is one thing.
So
And
does it reduce your rates of temporary nerve palsy or a permanent palsy?
actually, there was a meta-analysis, sir, which showed that there is reduction in the rates of both temporary and permanent facial palsy. But when we looked at the prospective studies alone, there was no difference. There was no improvement.
Right. So it is mostly to reduce your temporary nerve palsy rates and not permanent, because it doesn't really help you. Because once the injury has occurred and then you're detecting it, it is not of any consequence.
Yes.
So what would be your indication to do now facial nerve, intraoperative nerve monitoring?
In this case, sir?
Not in this case. What are your other indications?
Post-RT field, suppose when there's fibrosis, post-irradiated field would be my main setting where I would like to use ION. And in a recurrent setting, that would be.
So redo surgery is most important, because that's where your patient has undergone a surgery at mother center and now you're going to dissect. So your redo surgery is more likely to be the indication for doing a nerve monitoring.
Okay.
And the other indications are when you're doing a cross nerve grafting. So you want to identify the nerve on the contralateral side. So how do you prevent Fraze syndrome?
Fraze
during your surgery.
Yes, sir.
That will prevent the Fraze syndrome.
Fraze, if you look at the Fraze syndrome, it is caused by the actually there are the secretomotor parasympathetic secretomotor fibers supplying the parotid gland from the auriculotemporal nerve, and the sweat glands over the parotid over the skin of the parotid region, that is supplied by the sympathetic fibers from the great auricular nerve. So after the removal of the parotid gland, this nerve endings of the parasympathetic secretomotor fibers miscommunicate with the sympathetic fibers supplying the sweat glands. So that happens when there is not enough barrier between the parotid gland and the skin while closure. So one prevention aspect would be, when I'm doing the dissection, I would maintain my plane just under the superficial musculoaponeurotic system. That forms an anatomical barrier between the parotid gland and the skin. So I would, when I'm raising a flap, I would make sure all the subcutaneous fat is with the flap and I'm staying on the parotid fascia. In other words, I'm going just below the superficial musculoaponeurotic system. That would be one point. If I'm not able to do that, then always I have the option of interposition flaps or grabs. I can use temporalis fascia to cover up the to use it as a barrier. I can
temporalis fascia.
Yes, sir.
Pre-graft?
Not a graft, sir. It is just a facial advancement.
Have you seen it being done?
No, sir.
What is more commonly used?
Sternomastoid rotation.
And besides that, sternomastoid is not used for Fraze syndrome.
It is only when for Fraze, and if bulk is needed, we use it. So for isolated cases of Fraze syndrome, we don't use it. SMAS rotation is mentioned, but I have not seen it.
Collagen grafts, fat grafts.
Yes. Fat grafts from gluteal and thigh region, alloderm patches can be used, and polykeratin.
Those are used as barriers. Okay. Now, in the post-op setting, how do you diagnose phrase?
Post-operatively, you, literature says 15% of patients themselves report phrase, 30% of them only on questioning, and when we do a minor starch test, almost 95% are tested positive. So it is considered rather as a sequelae than a complication, and only when on questioning many of the patients report that.
So when will you treat phrase syndrome?
So when the patient is finds it too much of a discomfort to their lifestyle, the patient is a socialite, and this is a big troublesome issue for the patient, then I would intervene.
How will you intervene?
I have three options. First of all, I would map the area of the phrase syndrome where the gustatory sweating takes place by a starch test. And depending on that, I can use Botox injections, anticholinergic topical applications, and antiperspirants can be used for short-term effects.
So what have you seen being used in the practice?
I have not seen any. We don't usually.
But it suggests that it is not a very common occurrence. The patients usually are asymptomatic, though they may have phrase syndrome.
Yes.
Any other surgical technique to reduce phrase syndrome?
It's the last.
Have you heard of adequate carotidectomy?
As a last resort, tympanic neurectomy is advised.
No. Let's forget what to do for it. Tell me, have you heard of adequate carotidectomy?
Yes, sir. Adequate carotidectomy is it is a new terminology which has been emerging lately, and it has been advocated mostly for benign tumors. And the concept behind that is when the tumor is separated from the facial nerve, the margin is very close in that area. So there is no point in giving larger margins to the other areas. So that is the concept behind adequate parotidectomy. This adequate parotidectomy removes the tumor with adequate cuff of parotid tissue after identification of a facial nerve. That is what is adequate parotidectomy. And this adequate parotidectomy has been compared with superficial parotidectomy and total parotidectomy. I think two RCTs. And they have reported lower rates of facial nerve weakness with this.
What else?
Sorry, sir?
What else? Apart from lower rates of facial nerve weakness, what else?
The complication rates were also low, phrase syndrome, and
rates of phrase syndrome.
And fistula rates were similar, but.
So now tell me, is an adequate parotidectomy suitable in malignant tumors?
I didn't get your question, sir.
Is an adequate parotidectomy suitable in malignant tumors?
No, sir, I would not adopt that
Why?
scenario. Because adequate parotidectomy.
What are the margins you normally get in a malignant parotid tumor resection? Do you always get an R0 clearance?
No, sir, not necessarily.
Necessarily or never?
Never, sir. Almost never.
Why?
Because the area where we separate the superficial lobe from the facial nerve, that is always the closest margin. That could be even less than 1 mm.
So in a conservative parotidectomy, you'll never get an R0 clearance. So there is no concept of a margin at R0 margin. So then why not do it in an adequate? Why not do an adequate parotidectomy for a malignant tumor?
So basically, adequate parotidectomy is a complex surgery. It is not in the normal anatomical planes which we use.
You've got intraoperative nerve monitoring.
But still, it is only indicated for a very small, superficial, fully mobile, easily accessible tumor location.
So why not? So what makes a malignant tumor different from a benign tumor? that makes you go for a superficial or a total parotidectomy?
There could be intraparotid nodes, sir. So we need to clear the intraparotid nodes. So for that reason, we need to remove the superficial lobe or the deep lobe for that matter as a whole.
Deep lobe as well?
In case of deep lobe involvement.
So how many lymph nodes are there in the deep lobe?
There are about 8 to 10 intraparotid lymph nodes.
Very few, less than 4 nodes in the deep lobe. So the reason is not only lymph nodes, you can have a spread which is contiguous into the other regions. So you may not really get a margin. So you might have compromised margins because of the malignant spread and intraoperative nodes. That's why you want to do a total parotidectomy. Can you supplement? Do you need adjuvant radiation in pleomorphic? Will this patient require pleomorphic edema? When it comes to the pleomorphic adenoma, would you offer this patient adjuvant radiation?
No, sir.
What are your indications for adjuvant radiation in pleomorphic tumors?
Only in the recurrent setting and if it's margin positive, grossly.
So what do you mean by margin positive in a pleomorphic adenoma?
When there's a gross residual tissue identified after the surgery.
Where?
If a superficial parotidectomy is done and if I find a gross residual disease,
Can you remove it?
Sorry, sir?
Why can't you remove the residue?
Yes, sir. We would remove it and give RT.
So what is that called? It's called tumor spillage.
Yes.
So if you have gross tumor spillage, which has not been adequately cleared, or you're worried about leaving behind tumor in the vicinity, you might consider adjuvant radiation, even in benign lesions like pleomorphic adenoma.
Also, a facial nerve was in close proximity and we have left some tissue just to preserve the facial nerve. Even in that cases, we can.
Right. So what are your indications for doing a neck dissection?
So the most absolute indication would be a node positive disease clinically and radiologically. Other than node positive disease, elective neck dissection is not indicated in a low grade tumor. So the gray areas, whether we would go for a N0 high grade tumors. Again, there's a MSKCC data showing that the local recurrence is reduced to up to almost half when we supplement RT to surgery in high grade tumors.
No, we're talking about lymph node dissection.
Lymph node dissections, in our institution, usually we don't practice elective neck dissections.
What does literature say? Should you do a supramoid neck dissection or a modified radical neck dissection when you have malignant parotid lesion?
So it is actually in the neck dissection is not, the studies are conflicting. So the evidences are mixed actually. Some studies say that the yield of the lymph nodes is low when we do elective neck dissection and they are against it. And some advocate elective neck dissection in high grade, high stage tumors.
Right.
Rate of metastasis is
a high grade and a high stage tumor. So that is something it's important because you need to counsel your patient for the same.
Yes.
What do you all practice?
So we do not do elective neck dissection routinely. However, during the dissection, when we want to trace the posterior belly, we usually have to clear the level 2. So that level 2 is sent for frozen. And if that turns out to be positive, we do a neck dissection.
Right. So that's what we practice too. We do a level 2 dissection and send it for frozen section. And if it's a T3, T4 lesion or a high grade lesion, usually we don't know about the grade prior to surgery. We just know it's a benign or a malignant tumor. So your grade is not a deciding factor, but the location of the lesion, the size and extraparenchymal spread,
yes,
and the location. So more deep lobe tumors like this, I would consider doing a level 2 dissection.
Vijay, in this case, your preoperative diagnosis is only with the FNAC is only a benign.
Yes, sir.
So in these cases, what would you do? You have completed a total. You're planning for a total conservative parotidectomy in this case, right?
I've kept it open, sir. Actually, superficial bar total conservative.
You don't have, once you remove the tumor with adequate cuff of tissue around, you don't have anything in the deep lobe remaining after you do the dissection, because of its sheer size, you might end up doing a total conservative parotidectomy, right?
That could be a possibility.
What would you do in this case? Would you send this specimen for frozen? Because it could even be a malignancy. Postoperatively, you could get a report of malignancy, right? So what is the approach you would think of?
So if I'm doing a total conservative, there is frozen will not alter or change my decision. I've already done a total conservative parotidectomy.
No, we just now discussed about the neck, right?
Well, you're asking about the neck. No.
Here you don't have a primary diagnosis even to consider a lymph node biopsy frozen, right?
Yes, sir. Here in this case, as done routinely, I would send level 2 for frozen, sir. If that is positive, I would do an egg dissection.
But you don't have a tissue diagnosis of the primary itself.
I have an FNA which says pleomorphic adenoma, sir.
Would you consider doing intraoperative frozen section?
Yes, sir. I would do a frozen section, but
why would you do it?
Basically, frozen section I would do for only margins, sir. Diagnosis, it is not that reliable to comment on salivary gland tumors.
So when you are doing the surgery, what makes you decide that I want now frozen section?
When the facial nerve involvement is present, in that case, I would like to go for a frozen for margins, sir.
Right. So you have a primary diagnosis of a pleomorphic adenoma. Intraoperatively, you find you're not able to get a plane across the facial nerve, or you find it is stuck to other tissues like the sternocleidomastoid, the digastric, the tragus, the masseter. In those cases, you would then consider doing a frozen section because you would want to confirm that this is not a benign. Because as Bipin said, then you would want to consider doing a neck dissection because this is then would be an extra parenchymal spread and it would be a T3 lesion.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Can we go to the next case?
Sure.
So, this is a 60 years male, driver by occupation. He presented with complaints of swelling in the upper right side of neck for 4 months duration. The swelling was insidious in onset, increasing in size and painless. Patient denied any history of fever, weight loss or night sweats or any contact with TB. No history of any other swelling in the body. Patient denied history of the following: ulcer, swelling in the oral cavity, nasal discharge, nasal bleed or ear pain, throat pain or painful swallowing. No history of voice change, breathlessness or cough. Patient also did not have any difficulty in tongue protrusion, neck and shoulder movements. Patient was evaluated for the same outside with an FNA and ultrasound neck. Patient denied having similar complaints in the past. There was no history of excision biopsies or surgery in the past. No history of irradiation. No history of previous malignancy. Patient did not have any medical illness. Patient is a chronic smoker for 26 years, social drinker, no other habits. There was no significant family history with this patient. In general examination, patient was moderately built and nourished with a performance status of ECOG 1, no pallor or icterus, no generalized lymphadenopathy, vitals were normal. On inspection and palpation of neck, on inspection, I could only appreciate a mild fullness in the right submandibular region. Overlying skin was normal. On palpation, I could palpate a 2 into 2 centimeters discrete nodular swelling in the right submandibular region, which was hard and non-tender with a smooth surface and well-defined borders. The swelling was mobile but it was not bimanually palpable. The plane of the swelling was deep to deep fascia with no fixity to skin or deeper structures. I could also palpate another 2 into 1 centimeter irregular swelling in the region of level 2 in the anterior triangle, which was hard, non-tender, and mobile. The plane of this swelling was deep to sternomastoid, with no fixity to skin, sternomastoid fascia, sternomastoid or prevertebral fascia. The overlying skin was normal. There was no other swelling palpable in the neck. Neck movements were normal. Lower cranial nerves were intact. I examined the oral cavity and oropharynx of this patient. There was no trismus or ankyloplasia, tobacco teeth present, and there was no palpable lesion or induration anywhere in the oral cavity or oropharynx, including the floor of mouth. Indirect laryngoscopy was done and found to be normal. There was no enlargement of submandibular gland or parotid gland or thyroid gland. Scalp and skin of the face were normal. Systemic examination, chest clear. Patient did not have any hepatosplenomegaly. The right inguinal hernia noticed. Other systems were normal. To summarize, this is a 60 years male chronic smoker with no other risk factor or comorbidities. He presented with a painless swelling of 4 months duration, progressing in size. And on examination, 2 hard mobile nodes were palpable in right level 1B and 2 respectively, with no evidence of primary in clinical examination. So
Diagnosis?
is a metastatic node in the right level 1B2 with unknown primary.
And why are you calling it a metastatic node?
So one is the node is showing typical features of malignancy. It is a malignant node to begin with because it's hard.
What does the malignant node look like?
Usually it is of short duration history and it is painless to begin with, and on examination it is a hard node, irregular, non-tender, and it may have fixity with surrounding structures.
Okay. So what's your TNM staging?
With this available information, my TNM staging would be CT0, N2B, M0.
Do you think there will be extracapsular spread?
Grossly, clinically, there is no extrascapular spread, sir.
Because there's no fixity. It's freely
Yes.
mobile. Okay.
Yes.
So what will you do now for this patient?
Now, I would like to confirm my diagnosis first, and I would like to do a cytological diagnosis first by doing an FNA of the node.
Then how you would do an FNA or an ultrasound guided FNA?
In this case, the lesion is uniformly hard. I cannot palpate any soft or cystic areas. So FNA is sufficient in this case. The sensitivity is quite good. So I would.
Would you get some additional information on ultrasound?
Yes, I would always. Ultrasound would always give me additional information if any cystic areas missed in the clinical examination. Also, it could give me a diagnosis other than the node.
It's always preferred to do an imaging first, and since you don't want to go for any extensive imaging, you would prefer to do an ultrasound guided FNA.
Okay.
Okay. So now, why would you not do a PET CT scan or an MRI or a CT in this patient first? Why are you going for an FNA?
Because FNA can help me in directly ruling out, or it would guide me in my further imaging, sir. So based on FNA, I could guide my imaging and target.
What imaging would you be guiding by?
Sorry, sir.
What kind of imaging would you be doing?
I would do a CECT, contrast enhanced CT from base of skull to clavicle. That's my first imaging.
Not MRI?
No, sir.
So then your FNAC has helped you in deciding between CT and MRI, or just you would do CT anyway?
If my FNA is pointing towards, for example, an adenocarcinoma, upper level neck node, salivary gland tumor is one of the possibilities, then I would consider MRI in that case.
Okay.
So otherwise, CT and MRI are found to be equally sensitive for a nodal disease, and pickup rates are also pretty similar with CT and MRI.
Right. What else helps you guide you? How does a FNAC guide help you plan further?
With an FNA, I can, if it is, again, I can mention the scenario of adenocarcinoma. If I want to locate, if I want to find out if it's a thyroid primary, I can always do a thyroglobulin washout with the FNA sample, also calcitonin and TTF1. And considering the fact that 90% of the primaries are related to HPV, if it's a oropharyngeal CA, upfront, I can do a P16 assay and EBV from my FNA sample.
So coming to the immunohistochemistry, FNAC, you would, if it is a squamous cell cancer, what would be a panel of immunohistochemistry?
It depends on the site of the node. It's an upper neck node.
Squamous cell cancer, unknown primary.
Yes,
Does it
sir.
depend on the site of the node?
Yes, sir. If it is, usually it is in the upper neck nodes, which gives the diagnosis of squamous cell carcinoma.
Okay, and lower neck nodes?
Lower neck nodes, there are it's unlikely to give a squamous cell carcinoma as a diagnosis. There are other possibilities.
This is on the right side.
Yes, sir.
So on the right side, do you really think that your site of the node is guides you towards the histology?
No, sir. Site matters only if you're retrospectively thinking of the primary with the available histology. But
Right.
it's
Now tell me,
carcinoma, it doesn't matter.
metastatic squamous cell cancer on FNAC, what should be your immunohistochemistry panel?
So with that squamous cell carcinoma, I would do cytokeratin 10, 19, P16 assay, because I want to look for primaries in the head and neck. So so basically, this in a squamous cell carcinoma diagnosis, my IHC would only be helpful for confining my to look for primary. Unlike
you told us that 3 times. So what primary are you looking for?
the most common site which is detected in occult primary is oropharynx.
Okay.
So, and 90% of them are related with HPV.
60-year-old male.
Not in this case. So this patient does not fit into that.
What is your incidence of oropharyngeal cancer with HPV positivity?
HPV positivity 70%.
In your center?
We don't do it here, sir.
In India?
In India, it's very less, sir. It is only Western.
Yeah, so we are in India, no? This patient is an Indian. So are you suspecting HPV positivity in this patient?
No, sir. I was just giving the IHC panel, possible IHC panel. In this case,
okay. So HPV is one. What else should we be ruling out?
nasopharyngeal, EBV associated nasopharyngeal CA.
Right. So it's a entire panel today wherein you want to rule out viral mediated cancers and you want to rule out other associated cancers. So if you have squamous cell cancer, you will rule out HPV and EBV.
Yes, sir.
Today, all your panels would have that. And not necessarily because this patient is a young male today, you would want to rule out HPV. Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If it's an adenocarcinoma, what will be your panel?
I mean, adenocarcinoma, it would depend on my site of the node, sir. If it is upper neck adenocarcinoma, I would first like to rule out primaries from head and neck. That would be thyroid and salivary gland. So my panel would include a TTF1, thyroglobulin, calcitonin.
Okay.
And if it is level 4 or 5B adenoma, I would look at the infraclavicular primaries. That for that there is an elaborative IHC panel. To start with, I would go for a cytokeratin 7 and 20.
Okay. Fine. So now we have established it's a squamous cell cancer. What will be our next line of investigation?
Contrast enhanced CT from base of skull to clavicle to look for possible primaries in the head and neck.
What about primaries below the clavicle?
It is highly unlikely, but still there are chances that it could be from the infraclavicular primary also.
Where are the location of these primaries usually? Below the clavicle.
In a case of squamous cell carcinoma, sir?
Yes.
Lung is the most common site. And
what is the incidence in the lung and in the esophagus? It's less than 10%.
90% is from head and neck and 10% is
right below the clavicle. So now, is the CECT an adequate investigation, or would you do a PET CT scan today?
Yes, sir. I would definitely do a PET CT scan also.
Why?
Because the PET CT has come up in a big way. Literature suggests that PET CT has reduced the number of incidents of CUP from 9% to around 3 to 5% because of its pickup rate, which is reported to be around 30% to 50%. And PET CT, apart from picking up the primary, it also detects the other nodal metastasis and distant metastasis, so which could alter my management. And it is to alter management in around 20% of the cases, according to the literature.
So your first line of investigation would be a PET CT scan, if you have it.
Hello.
Hello. One moment, please.
Doctor.
Yeah. Your first line of investigation would be a PET CT scan.
Something seems to be wrong with Vijay's connection.
Okay.
Okay, Vijay's back. Okay. Sir asked, what is your first line of management?
Yes, sir.
No, so we were just saying that PET CT scan should have been your first line.
Got disconnected in question.
Yeah, that's fine. Apart from a PET CT scan,
Yes,
what
sir.
are the investigation? Apart from a PET CT, what are the investigation would you do?
After doing my imaging of CCT and T, I would do a pan endoscopy in this patient.
Why would you do a pan endoscopy?
Preferably GA.
So what all would you do in a pan endoscopy, and why would you do a pan endoscopy? What is the yield in a pan endoscopy?
The yield of pan endoscopy is reported to be around 30%, sir.
Really? Will you see a mucosal disease not picked up on a PET CT scan in 30% of patients?
The overall the pickup rate is 30%, sir. But after
the PET CT scan pickup.
After the PET is really low, sir.
So would you, apart from triple endoscopy, what other investigations would you do?
Something's really wrong with his connection.
I got disconnected in between. I couldn't hear that.
Apart from a PET CT, what other investigation would you do?
Yeah.
Pan endoscopy, like that would be examination under anesthesia, sir.
Yeah, what else? Would you do a tonsillectomy? Would you do a lingual tonsillectomy?
Yes, sir. If I'm doing an examination, doing an nasopharyngeal survey, direct laryngoscopy, inspection and palpation of the oral cavity. If I don't, if everything is negative, I'm for a.
Vijay, maybe you can switch off your video. Your network will improve. Yeah, maybe now.
In the
So should we
examination under anesthesia,
yes.
yes, sir. In that, I would do an esophageal survey, direct laryngoscopy, inspection and palpation of os, particularly base of tongue and tonsils. And I would first go for a targeted biopsy if I find anything suspicious and send it
Okay.
for frozen. If I find anything suspicious as a last.
Vijay.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, we can hear you. Hello.
I had answered the question, sir.
Yeah, we didn't hear the whole thing.
Yeah, you may have answered. We didn't hear you.
Okay. So can you give me 2 minutes?
Yeah, go on.
Switch on to my other network.
Yeah, yeah.
It's cloudy. I don't know if it's raining outside. So it's been raining quite heavily all these
Yeah,
days.
Bombay, it was raining like crazy last 2 days.
Yeah, it's very chilly also. I heard my family's there in Bombay.
Yeah, yes. You must have seen the horrendous videos.
Yes, sir. Live through it too. Usually we have lots of discussion on the chat, sir, but I think everybody's scared of you. Nobody's saying anything.
Scared of me, of all the people.
There's nothing happening on chat. Otherwise,
I'm
you.
not seeing the chat. Okay, I'm seeing the chat. They are answering questions here. Okay.
But usually it's like a big debate going on in the side in the chat, but this time it is all quiet.
I think it is because there's nothing. Vijay is answering everything, so they are just keeping quiet.
So, usually a parallel class going on in the chat box.
Yeah, we would have these guys putting up all the meta-analysis and RCTs and everything.
Yes, yes.
So all the people who are sitting in the last row are the guys who are putting up all these on the chat.
Mhm.
Array, the boss also doesn't know this. Put it up. But I think, the attendance in academic meetings because of this COVID thing has gone up, at least at TMH. Earlier, they would have some excuse that I'm going here, I'm going there, I've gone some work. Now, no excuse. So it's 95% now. Every 95% of people are logged in.
Okay.
Very good. We have a weekly, once in 15 days now, academic meet. So it's quite full. That's good.
We have our classes almost every day in the morning sessions.
Right, right. So now everybody is quite into of doing your table of contents. Otherwise, everybody would run away and you would want them to discuss journals.
Vijay is around.
I had asked him to keep another one standby because once we had some issues before, we had the second dongle and everything ready. I think
So what we do is we keep 2 people.
yeah. So this is just
So we don't make one person or put one person on the hot seat. We get 2 guys, so that if one person does this no network connection, we get the other guy.
the batch I did that. Means the one who have written the exam now. Means we had a person standby. This batch is like too scared. They just entered final year.
We can ask the chat guys to
Can you hear
come
me, sir?
online.
Yeah, Vijay.
Okay, Vijay.
So I was telling that I would do an examination under anesthesia,
Yeah.
complete inspection and palpation of oropharynx, particularly base of tongue, tonsils,
Yeah.
pharyngeal survey, and direct laryngoscopy. If I find anything suspicious, I would go for a target biopsy and submit it for frozen section. If
So
I
now my question is very specific. we hear all this thing about tonsillectomy and palatine tonsillectomy. Do we practice it in our country? If not, why?
Because most of the data of the detection by tonsillectomies is from Western experience, sir, where the oropharyngeal, it is very common over there, HPV related oropharynx.
Right.
And here it is not that common, sir, in India.
Yeah, so the incidence of oropharynx is lower. That one could be because we are not diagnosing it, and two, because actually it must be very low. So whenever anybody asks you this, you need to just quote that in literature, a unilateral tonsillectomy, the yield of detecting the primary increases by almost 40 to 50%.
Yes, sir.
And that is why you would consider doing a tonsillectomy.
Okay,
Would you now do, in addition to this, a palatine tonsillectomy? That doesn't increase the yield so much. Okay. So now what would be your management? This patient is having a regional node. He has no primary seen anywhere. It is a squamous cell cancer. It is not HPV positive. This patient is 60-year-old. How will you manage this patient?
So this is a N2B disease, sir.
Yes.
Triple node ipsilateral. And N2B disease, I can categorize this as a small volume disease also. So, but again,
Can you see on the CT scan and can you comment on the extracapsular spread?
Yes, sir.
You can.
No. In CT, there's no extracapsular spread, sir.
No. So, how is the sensitivity of being able to identify extracapsular spread on a CT scan?
CT scan, it is actually very low, sir. It is only having 40% sensitivity, breaking up a ENE.
So you should say no. I would rather not base my judgment of extracapsular spread on a CT scan, and that is literature proven.
Yes, sir.
So now, how would you plan this? Is an N2B disease?
So N2B disease, according to the recommendations, needs a combined modality treatment.
Okay.
Stage 4 disease. And now I will have to choose between surgery first or radiation first, with or without chemotherapy. So my
you said multimodality treatment.
Combined modality.
You said combined modality treatment. Yes. Yet you would use only radiation?
No, sir. Radiation with or without chemo.
Radiation with or without doesn't mean combined modality. Radiation alone would be a single modality.
Chemo radiation, sir.
Chemo radiation. Would you consider surgery followed by radiation?
Sir, in this case, since it's a low volume N2B, I can also do that. I can go for a surgery followed by.
So now this patient is sitting in front of you. How will you plan out his treatment? You can't say that I can do this or this. So what are your methods of deriving a treatment plan for this patient? What factors will guide you?
Look at the age of the patient, performance status, and tolerate a combined time modality treatment if it proceeds that way.
Okay.
These three are the main factors, and the morbidity associated with the sequencing.
So tell me one at a time. If this patient had poor performance status, what would be your plan?
I would go for a surgery first, sir.
You go for surgery first. Hello?
Yes, sir. Because he may not tolerate chemotherapy and large volume RT doses.
Right. So what is the outcomes of patients treated with surgery followed by radiation, concurrent chemoradiation, and surgery followed by concurrent chemoradiation? Is there any evidence in literature?
There's actually no level 1 evidence or RCT.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me, sir?
No, it's blur.
There's some issue, I think, from your side because you're also.
Okay. Shall I hear him? Okay. Okay. Go on.
Sir asked you to continue, Vijay. Why is Vijay muted now?
Yeah, go on.
I think he's gone off now, sir.
There is no level 1 evidence comparing these sequencing of modalities head on, sir. But whatever available data is there, it says that there is no difference in the outcomes if either of them is, with the sequencing.
So there is no literature that gives you a level 2 or a level 3 evidence. Is there any randomized trial or is there any systematic review that has evaluated?
Well, there is a systematic, there's a meta-analysis which has evaluated between the radiation techniques and the site of radiation, sir.
Right.
But not with the surgical part. So there is
right.
2016 meta-analysis which looked at RT unilateral versus bilateral and RT to neck alone versus neck plus mucosal axis.
Right. So does that help you plan this treatment in this patient?
So in this patient, there's a level 1B and 2 node. So most probably I would suspect a oropharyngeal CA. Which would require
oropharynx spreads to 1B and 2?
No, sir, it is
1B, right?
Yeah, but highly, it's less likely, but oral cavity would be followed by oropharynx as my possible sites.
Okay. So you would consider offering this patient surgery followed by radiation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what is the current guidelines for a N2B disease?
Current guidelines recommends a combined modality treatment, but the sequencing is up to the discretion of the surgeon.
Right. CTRT followed by salvage surgery.
Yes.
So now in this patient who is now undergone concurrent chemoradiation, what should be your follow-up plan?
Patient has undergone concurrent chemoradiation. I would assess the patient clinically after a period of 8 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks. That is the recommendation. And clinically, if the patient is having response, then I would consider doing a PET CT at 12 weeks.
Would you do a PET CT only or only clinical evaluation?
Sorry, sir?
Would you do a PET CT irrespective of your clinical evaluation at the end of 8 to 12 weeks?
Yes, sir. I would irrespectively do it. The only change of plan would be if clinically I'm suspecting no response, I would do an earlier PET CT, that is around at 10 weeks or immediately when I suspect no response in the clinical.
Right.
So
when do you consider salvage neck dissection?
So that would be based on my one scenarios. If clinically I don't find any response, I would do a PET CT, and if that turns out to be positive for the residual disease, I would do a salvage neck dissection.
Clinically, if you find that there is some nodularity felt and on a PET CT scan, there is no evidence of any avidity, would you still do a neck dissection?
Then I would also like to know the size of the node, sir.
If it is a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter node.
So 1 centimeter node with no uptake, again, it falls in the equivocal category because according to the recommendations, more than 1 centimeter uptake positive, go for a neck dissection. Less than 1 centimeter uptake negative, can observe. So it falls in the equivocal category where it's 1 centimeter and no uptake. So I can follow up the patient, close follow up with ultrasound FNA SOS during the follow-ups.
So there's a level 1 evidence. Are you aware of the study which was done on a N2B, N3 disease?
So EORTC study?
Not EORTC. The Trans-Tasmanian study. And are you aware of the PET neck study?
No, sir.
So I recommend that you read these two studies because this gives you understanding about the PET CT scan and the neck nodes and the negative predictive value of PET CT scan post-treatment.
Okay, sir.
So this is level 1 evidence which suggests that if there is no uptake and if the SUV values are below 4, the possibility that this would harbor disease will be very low.
Okay, sir.
Okay. I think I'm done. Bipin, you need to ask anything?
So here, what have you decided? In this case, you have decided to do upfront surgery or you have decided on chemo-RT?
The final decision is chemo-RT followed by salvage neck dissection if necessary.
So what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages?
Chemo-RT, concurrent chemo-RT, my possible
More or less, it has been discussed. So what is the advantage of doing surgery upfront?
surgery upfront, I can always have a pathological staging information, which is not provided, which is not available if I go for a concurrent chemo-RT. So pathological staging with EC status can be known if I go for upfront surgery, and I can always do typing of my specimen for to identify the possible primary.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Next is morbidity associated with the procedure can be minimized if I go with upfront surgery, and if there could be a scenario where the nodal status, pathological nodal status could be PN1. So in that case, I can also avoid an RT.
Yeah. So the point is, if you are taking up these cases for surgery, you should have a very good workup, especially with all the panels and all that. You have to get a good clue that it is not nasopharynx or any other site. And if you have a strong suspicion of probably base of tongue origin or oropharynx, that for that matter, you can do a tongue-based mucosectomy or something like that along with your neck dissection, and then tailor your treatment. That will help you in tailoring, reducing the morbidity associated with chemo-RT. The only caveat is that it has to be done in a proper setting. If you are using surgery as an upfront modality.
Yes, sir.
So where do you use? Where is the recommendation of surgery ahead of chemo-RT? Which stage? According to NCCN and all those guidelines.
In N1 disease and in small volume unilateral or bilateral small volume diseases, we can go for surgery first.
Right. So you might consider only in a N1 disease, and it might not consider even radiation.
Yes.
There are two very old studies which have supported the use of surgery alone in an N1 disease, because only in 28% of patients you might have an extracapsular spread, which might then force you to consider concurrent chemoradiation following surgery.
Yes.
But in majority of the patients, you might end up not even radiating the mucosal sites, but after, of course, discussion with the patient. What is the incidence of primary emerging following your treatment in the next 5 years?
So post radical treatment, the emergence of primary is almost same as that of a second primary in a known head and neck cancer. That would be less than 10% actually.
Right, between 5 and 15% over the next 5 years. Right.
We have only one question. When is deep lobe resection only practiced? Vijay, would you like to answer that?
We had discussed that only in case of benign tumors, where the R0 margin is not under, it's not a risky issue, and a very superficial small mobile tumors where we are not worried about a positive margin. I think in those cases we can attempt a deep lobe resection.
In a practical scenario, you would consider that when the deep lobe tumor has extended into the parapharyngeal space. So here it is sitting just at the what you call the entrance of the parapharyngeal space. Suppose the tumor has slipped into the parapharyngeal space, then you can get it separate from the main parotid tissue by a transoral or any different approach other than the transparotid approach. Those are the situations when you do an isolated deep lobe removal. Otherwise, most of the times you have to go through the superficial.
What is the advantage of doing only a deep lobe resection? Vijay,
Yes, sir.
what is the advantage? Why are we doing a deep lobe parotidectomy?
Actually, I'm not.
We have discussed that. I think Prathamesh asked the question earlier also.
We said that you might avoid doing a superficial parotidectomy. You can reduce the incidence of phrase.
Yes, sir.
Preserve the gland function. In the group, the Italian group, which has published on this, has shown that almost 80% of the patients have a functioning parotid, because the major functional part of the gland is preauricular.
Superficial lobe.
That is preserved when you do a deep lobe parotidectomy.
And the complications can be reduced.
Complications can be less. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Our head of our department, Dr. Shaji, sir, would like to say a few words.
Hi, Saji. Good evening.
Good evening, Prathamesh.